Well, it lived up to its cover. Bland and not particularly original. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be talking about Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. And if you couldn't already tell, this is going to be a somewhat ranty review on this book. So let's quickly talk about what this book is about. So this is about basically we have four main characters. They're all young people who are reaching 18 and then discover that they have some sort of powers. They're in different areas of the countries and, I should say world, I guess, even though it's not like a whole worldwide thing. But they're in different areas of the world and they're kind of learning that they have powers, figuring out how to use them, and start having these dreams of some experience of walking the mountain path and coming toward a gate. We don't really get a lot of information on the why behind any of this, which is definitely one of my issues with this. But basically what we get is this is a pretty large book. This book is just over 700 pages. And it should not be 700 pages long. Is definitely one thing. And I love long books. I am usually the first one to be like, oh, I wish this was like 100 pages longer for a story that's good. There's just not enough story here to justify this page count, especially because we get a lot of repetition. So I mentioned the base thing. We have these four characters coming of age and discovering that they have powers and having the same dream. Many times throughout this book, we get the same dream verbatim just from somebody else's POV. Occasionally, a couple of words might be changed, but repeatedly in different POVs, we get this same dream said again and again. Very, very repetitive. And also because of the fact that we're following four different characters who are all learning about their powers and trying to figure it out and experiencing a lot of the same things, it just makes all the POVs feel very similar in a lot of ways. It makes the characters seem a bit more shallow and just once again makes it incredibly repetitive. Now, one kind of unrelated, but probably honestly my biggest nitpick with this book is the absolute constant use of okay. Capital O-K, which A, makes no sense in a fantasy novel considering that's something that came out in like the 1900s in the US as a specific reference to something. Not just doesn't mean all right in that thing. It does, but it makes no sense in a fantasy novel. But also just because even if it wasn't for that, like it's the specific capital okay, even if it was just like the normal word like okay, used constantly and almost never sounds right from the characters saying it. That also kind of blends into just where the prose, and so here's a positive thing. The prose is very easy to read. It at times felt a little bit strange. Part of it, like I said, is because there are sometimes words or the way things are worded that don't sound supernatural or don't fit the theme. But the big positive thing I will say with this book is it was very, very quick to read. I was easily able to read 100 plus pages a day in the amount of time normally that I would probably struggle to get to 100 pages with some other books. So I will give it that. This reads quick, which I feel like it needs to because it's too long. But the constant use of things like that, there's literally at one point, this was only one time, but literally at one point a character says, "What's up, my lord? Are you okay?" And I'm just like, really? Really? That sounds normal to you? So that definitely wasn't a huge thing I was a fan of, but otherwise, too, it was just also incredibly predictable. There really wasn't anything original necessarily being offered here, besides maybe, the powers that these people have, which do various different things. But with each of the POVs, we're seeing kind of familiar types of stories. We have a young lord who is, warring to want to do what he wants to do. We have a young girl who's wanting to become a priestess. We have a young boy who is like the weakling and coward of his tribe. And then we have another young woman who hers is the the one of the least, but she is the daughter of a courtesan, basically, and that's kind of how it starts with that as well. all of them end up feeling somewhat similar, and the stories just aren't super original or interesting in any way to me. I didn't really care that much about these characters for the most part, and I actively disliked some things about some of them as well. So it just, no part of this really stood out to me. The kind of overall geopolitical situation is also something that, not particularly original, but I felt like that part was written well, and it was a thing that I definitely could see where it was going. We've got like a holy empire, the holy church, and they're closely aligned, and so potentially there's going to be some tension between this other country or these other countries and the empire, basically. And so that's kind of normal. You do get that. The religion, which is very much based on Catholicism, which is actually surprisingly common. A lot of fantasy books will do religions that seem to be very strongly based on Catholicism. For whatever reason, it's pretty common. The religion set up in general specifically has a reference to a savior who died on a tree and that kind of thing as well. So it has that, and it's setting up, a lot of it is the religious angle and then the overall like political situation with the war. And so those parts I felt like worked for the most part. It was just the actual characters, there wasn't a lot of story there. This felt like we were reading 4 different origin stories, but all of the origin stories were just so similar. And it's not until the very end that things start to actually be like, oh, something's going to happen here. We really, like, everyone's going through their own types of conflict, and there is, you know, something that's mentioned, and it shows right in the prologue too, that there are groups of people who are like looking for people like this, specifically trying to find them. But we don't really get much of that, and it just, honestly, I don't know why there wasn't more put in here, especially at the length this book is. I just really feel like it's somewhat unforgivable that there's not more story here. There really just should be something more, is what it comes down to. So, I know I've ranted a lot. This is not a terrible book. I ended up going with 2.75 stars. I could not bring myself to give it a full 3 because of everything I've just talked about and more. I just had a lot of problems with this. It was very quick and easy to read despite its length, like I said. And the writing and parts of it aren't bad by any means, but it just felt so painfully average and just really nothing really stood out to elevate this book for me. And that's what really just kind of disappointed me. I do want to talk about, too, to get out some more of my thoughts that are going to involve spoilers. So I'm going to talk to some spoilers, which I will have timestamps so you can skip that section and get to kind of the recap on the final thoughts at the end. But I want to talk about each of the characters, and so that's kind of where I am going to go from here. So check if you've not read this to skip past the spoiler section. But so we've got... starting now with spoilers. We got our 4 main characters. We have Corin, Arian, Liana, and Alana. The last 2 names, which a lot of people pointed out in Discord, very similar. And Corin and Arian aren't like that much different either. So, you know, that's neither here nor there. But so we have each of them who are going on their own paths. And this is where I want to talk about where it just felt like it was a bit predictable. So the one that was the most predictable by far, in my opinion, was Corin, which is sad because that was the most interesting POV for a large chunk of the book for me. Corin is specifically banished for being a coward from his clan. Going with him is a girl from the village named Agbeth, who has a deformity. It sounds like she has some sort of like epilepsy or had a stroke at some point, and so she can't really use one of her legs and has some other conditions, basically. And so she was also kind of like an outcast, and she decides to go with him. They become a couple, say they're married, they travel out into the wilderness, and that's where he discovers his powers, which involve being able to control both beasts and men. And so just his plotline, eventually they decide they need to go back because Agbeth is sick, and if she ever ends up getting pregnant, then we're going to have problems living out in the wilderness, so they decide to go back. And it really annoyed me because this is done several other times, but when the author makes something so insanely obvious and yet still tries to make it feel like it's a twist or like it's unexpected, that gets on my nerves because it just feels so condescending to me when it's written like that. But so he comes back and he's just like, oh, I'm just going to tell him I have this big beast Felrun. and they're just going to let me back and it'll be fine. Like, no, of course that's not going to happen. The clan chief's going to want to kill him, and so then they're going to have to fight, and he's going to use his powers, and like, yeah, obviously. And so he ends up doing that, and then afterwards, like multiple times, he's like, out of all the things I thought may have happened, this was never one. I'm like, really? Because it was really, really obvious that this was going to happen. And then he continues to just be shocked at the things that happen. So he goes to the other clan where there's so much animosity between them and offers them peace, and they don't take it super seriously, and like are just like calling them out. And he's like, no, it'll be fine. And then they leave and they get attacked and everything. And he's like, I can't believe they would do this. I'm like, obviously that was going to happen. It just was so blatantly obvious, but maybe it's just supposed to show that the character is super naive, but it just kind of turned, I liked the earlier parts of that character the most, and then it just became so blatantly predictable. The biggest problem character, I'd say, before I even get to the other two, would be Alana, because Alana's whole power is that she can dominate men by using their lust for her, basically, and control them. And like the whole thing, it just kind of gets worse and worse. And so she's the daughter of a prostitute, basically, and so that's her mother dies, and then a priest. Shocker, priests are, of course, sexual abusers in the fantasy world too, because that's why we're using Catholicism. But so a priest basically tries to rape her, and she kills him, and she's like determined that she's never going to, be taken advantage of and everything, but then immediately starts using her powers to dominate men and have them sleep with her so that she can get what she wants and be protected. Which already is like, I feel like that immediately, like her whole build up to that point, which there wasn't a ton, but just the whole introduction of that character is now like, nope, we're going to do the opposite now. I'm in control, so that makes it better. But it's just literally, it's constantly mentioned how just insanely beautiful and attractive she is, and that's why virtually every man who sees her just immediately has lust, and she can use that. Because if they don't, like if it's either like a homosexual man or a straight woman, she's not able to control them because there has to be lust. But if anybody who's like attracted to her and feels lust, she can control, and that virtually is everybody. Is basically the way that it is, and it comes to a fore toward the end where she's about to be captured by the ideals or adels or however you say it, guards. Who she escapes from, and she's like, well, they've caught me, what am I gonna do? And she's like holding her knife like she's threatening to kill herself. Nope, takes her top off, and immediately they're all drooling and she can control them. And I'm just like, I can't believe that I had to read that. That was just such a ridiculous thing to happen, and it really annoyed me. But that's what happens there. And then with Arian, his parts were okay too, but once again, he doesn't want to be a priest, and things happen, and he ends up being okay to get sent to learn how to be a military officer. So he goes to a military officer school, and like half of it's just like, he was really good at everything. This was harder, but then he applied himself and was really good at that too. And he's also learning to use his powers against like the bully, and setting that up to be a plot point for however many books this ends up being. And just none of that, once again, none of it really stood out a whole lot. And then he starts having prophetic dreams, and this is where we get into, once again, like, telling you what's going to happen, but then trying to make it seem like it's a surprise, because he has a prophetic dream, after the war starts between Atlantis and Andar, and he knows where they're going to come, and he sets up this whole plan, and he's laying it out piece by piece as it's happening, and he's like, but they didn't know this other thing was going to happen. I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, obviously you had this plan. Like, I don't know. Like, that part is probably more of a me nitpick, because I don't like when the movies do it a lot, and it's always been a minor annoyance for me, the whole, like, we have a plan, and then they're not going to tell you, or, like, we'll talk about the plan later, and you just have to, like, watch it happen. So I'm just like, you can just see the plan, but so it's kind of that thing, so that was pretty minor. But then it's like, he keeps having dreams about a woman who's going to be burned on a pyre for being a heretic, and something's off about him. He just can't see it, and he's just convinced it's Alana, and it just was so blatantly obvious that it was not Alana, it was Liana, who was the person there, and he's just absolutely shocked when he finally figures it out, and then goes off to try and save her, and go from there. And then Liana, at least, her power is healing, and it seemed like they were going to be adding a lot more stuff right at the end of the book there, too, but with her also, it's just, nothing like particularly done. She is at the school, learning to be a priest, and her POV, toward the beginning at least, mostly is just, I meant to show that the church is corrupted, I guess. And once again, that's pretty realistic for the real world, especially if you look at like medieval times. There was a lot of corruption in the church. There were times where there were like multiple popes, and there were warring factions, so stuff like that makes sense. Once again, like, you could get a little more original because it's a fantasy novel, but I don't mind usually. I know some people in Discord didn't like the religious parts. That didn't really bother me. I've read a lot of other books that have like heavy religious themes that are involved. Not a thing that bothers me, but that seemed to be kind of the most of the point of it. And then it's just her constantly too, every single, like every other word or like thought, and then she's like praying about it, and that just got a little repetitive too. We're just like, Renee, let me be this, and then she's like, and then I thought, like, oh no, that's, and constantly, and so it's just her plot with like, she just is going off, and then people witness her healing, and she specifically knows that there's the organization of guards, like the military of the church, is looking for people who can do what she can. She was questioned. She specifically knows, but she's like, no, it'll be fine. Other people with me, even though one of them's looking at me really weird and seems odd, everything's fine. I'll just go home. And then she gets, they take her and are gonna burn her as a heretic, and she's just like, oh my. And then the evil priest guy's like, just so you know, this was my plan. And she's like, okay. He's like, yeah, this too. All of it was my plan. In just that kind of like cheesy supervillain way. Editing Nico here, because apparently, despite how long this video is, I realized a very big thing I forgot to mention. So the prologue of this book shows somebody who's presumably from the church who's hunting down one of the other Illborn people. And so, presumably we're supposed to think those are the bad guys. And like everything else like shows the church is full of corruption, that Adel's guards like to, torture people and kill people and whatnot. But then it's like all of these people who get these powers end up, for the most part, using them in very poor ways, where you have Corin who, seems like he's only going to do good things, but then his first thought, like, what if I take the control of the mind of my wife? Like, I wouldn't do it, but I'm thinking about it for some reason. Alana, of course, with just like literally causing the deaths of others because she's, like, no, you have to do whatever I say, only what I say, and being pretty terrible to people there. You do have Arian, who he uses it, in battle. So like, obviously battles are going to be subjective from the size, but to like absolutely annihilate and kill people, and seems to have a lot of trouble controlling his temper and his urge to kill people. And then Leanna is the only one who really doesn't seem to do anything like particularly wrong. She is just trying to heal and, be pious, but that's also because she's part of the church, which is bad. So it's like, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to think about here, but it seems like, maybe the people hunting these people with powers have a point when they pretty immediately start using their powers to do bad things. So I'm like, maybe that's going to be the big twist later in the series, that they are like created by something evil and they're not there to save the world or whatever. They're not the heroes, but I'm just like, I'm not rooting for any of these people at this point. So I just wanted to mention that as well, because I had said that in Discord and I completely forgot to include it in the review. And so it's just, I kept hoping something would stand out to me with this book, but it just really didn't. And with those 4 characters, none of them really did a lot for me. I really didn't care about them. And so much of what happened, like I said, just to me felt very repetitive and very predictable. And that just kind of pulled me out of it. If this would have been a much shorter book, maybe that would have been better. I don't know. But I just could not really find anything to keep my interest in this series whatsoever, which is unfortunate. I know this is a very unpopular opinion, and I'm well aware of that. Most people, even in the Discord who read Illborn, seem to like it quite a lot more than I did. I know a lot of people, including other like booktubers, have rated this 5 stars and been very, very pleased with it. I really, really didn't. Like I said, I know this was a rant review. I said it was going to be ranty at the beginning, and once I just started talking, it turned into more like a full-on rant. But really nothing stood out to me. This just felt like such an average book. And so I don't know if I'm taking points off just because of the fact that it was so average. Like I said, besides some complaints about some of the writing style, it wasn't bad, but it just also, to me, was not good either. There was nothing about this that just drew me in or that really gave me a lot of enjoyment. The only thing just that I got through it really quick. It's probably honestly the only reason I didn't DNF the book is just because I was reading it so quickly that by the time I'm like, I should probably DNF, I'm like, I'm going to be done in a day or two tops, so I'll just finish it out and go from there. But this is definitely not a series that I will be continuing. I really have no interest in finding out more. There's not a lot of answers in this book for the most part, so maybe that's done to make me curious and want to know more, but more so it makes me wonder why I just read a 700-page book and it feels like the main plot hasn't even really been introduced yet at this point with that many pages. So that's kind of just where I left off on this. So those are my thoughts. I know there's probably going to be a lot of disagreement, so feel free to tell me in the comments why I am wrong and you disagree with me, or if you're a rare person who agrees with me, because like I said, I've heard almost nobody have negative thoughts about this, and so I don't know why I have to be the person with all of the unpopular opinions, but it looks like this is another one. But either way, of course, let me know your comments down below. I'm always interested to talk and discuss, even if it's a different viewpoint from what I have. Check the link in the description as well for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to chat this book, other books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.